Hi, I'm Chris Allen. I'm a STAR mentor now within the district, but I was a fourth grade teacher at Highline when we did the project.
And I'm Lisa Van Ness. I am a fourth grade teacher, and I was a fourth grade teacher here at Highline as well last year when we did the project.
And I'm Jennifer Bredstorff, and I worked in Lisa's classroom as an English language specialist.
So, the first thing I want us to think about is what were the big global targets for this learning experience? And I know that at different points of the experience, we were focusing in on different segments of this target for understanding, but what were the most general things that we wanted kids to take away from this family narrative learning experience?
Um, well, one of the things was making connections with their family members, encouraging the kids to have conversations about their family member's story and their history, and also then taking that connection of their home identity and connecting it with their school identity was a major thing.
The other theme that we was the overarching of the project was theme and finding theme throughout our story and understanding that a story isn't just a text. It's also that verbal story that every single one of us has.
And also getting the kids to ask the right questions that'll get them a deeper story. We talked about how it's their responsibility to go deeper. And the great thing about this project is I really, as a teacher, you have no control over the content and the depth of details they get. It is completely up to them. So they can very easily see if they succeeded or failed or need to do more work.
And it really facilitated great speaking and listening, practice and skills, as well as responsive questioning and responding to what they were hearing and then tagging on to something else.
Well, I think we definitely wanted kids to understand that text is going beyond words on paper. And that is something for us educators, we're also kind of learning. I think the Common Core standards and Colorado standards are kind of bringing that to light. But the text is anything where you can gather information or gather a story. And so I think for the kids to see that the text could be the memories inside their family members' heads was very interesting for them. I mean, that is what reporting is. That's what interviewing is.
I think for me, what was really important is as a kid is reading a story or as a student is reading a story, that they are seeing these vivid pictures in their mind and that we are connecting. When we pick up a book, we're starting to connect to those stories. And so from one of the takeaways that I wanted my students to really feel was that when they went home and they heard these stories from their parents, that they were making those same connections.
Well, and it's also, connecting it to literature. Most writers, when they write a story, they're writing it from an experience. They're writing it from, it's an inspiration. So our family members' stories are an inspiration for our own stories and an inspiration for how we go through life and perceive life.
And being able to really, really, really elaborate within our stories.
Mm-hmm.
They had to figure out really quickly that they had to come up with some really deep questions. We, as teachers, had to be responsive and say, okay, are we giving them enough information to find those questions so that they can get deep enough within their own writing and elaborating?
Yeah, and were we scaffolding the kids with, or front-loading them enough so that they understood what deep questioning was and what types of answers they could possibly elicit from the deep questioning.
And I think it's really important to say here, though, that even with the scaffolding and even knowing that they had to ask responsive questioning and that they were going to be writing about their family members' experience, I think doing this project and then looking back and reflecting on it and saying, oh, I didn't do enough, that was also a major understanding for this project, was that it might not be enough the first time you do it, and that's okay. and that you can always go back and ask more questions. But it's also realizing when you do need more, when do you need to go deeper? And then again, that is your responsibility to see that and then to do it.
There's one more big overarching target for students' understandings that we've talked about. I want you guys to spell this out a little bit. This idea of connection, of community.
Mm-hmm.
Say something about what we wanted kids to understand in terms of connection and community.
I think that cultural identity piece of where we really wanted kids to say, we wanted us to feel as a family. That's what I call my class. My kids were always, we were a family. And we are all connected. And our stories are all connected. And we can find similarities within each other's stories and within our parents' stories. And so kids really being able to say, this is my story at home, but I'm also bringing that story into school. And my academic identity is shining through this cultural identity, this home, the story that my parents have is being honored when I come to school. Who I am as an individual is honored. And I think that was one of the most important things that we really wanted to highlight as we were planning for this, is that we were honoring every child's story.
I completely agree.
Well, and then the whole idea of the kids getting to know each other's stories, I think was really powerful. And you talked about how the whole class knew Lena's story. And then making connections to that and being able to see that there were themes in their own lives that ran through hers too.
And then building that trust and having that trust with one another, because there were so many times where they were doing partner activities or sharing with the class, and so there was this beautiful trust of parents trusting us that we will honor their story, kids trusting one another with honoring their story. So there's this beautiful part of that relationship where we have to trust one another. And in order to do a project like this, we knew that trust was going to be at the forefront. Them trusting us and us trusting them.
A thought that is really just building on your thinking, it's not something different. When you are able to establish this authentic relationship and create this dynamic, this family dynamic in your classroom, you are a more credible model for your kids about how to develop an authentic relationship with content. In this case, the act of reading not just reading words on paper, but interpreting any kind of a text, and then also your identity as a writer. So the effort, the work, the time, the energy that goes into establishing this credible sense of a family dynamic, this authentic trustworthiness, then makes your modeling of your academic identity more accessible to your kiddos.
Like you said, the kids knowing that we're honoring them and the family members knowing that we're honoring them does get so much buy-in. And I can get, after we did this project, I could get very rigorous with these kids. Rigor that they hadn't seen before. And expectations, my expectations even went higher. And there was this trust, there was this buy-in, like the kids that, struggle with everything, they were happy to struggle through. It just really changed the dynamics. Like if you want to take your class somewhere, show them that you care about who they are and who their family are. It's well worth it, because then you can do whatever you need to do. Like
So the teachers watching this and hoping to replicate and being responsive to their students, one of the main questions I know they're going to ask is about assessments. How do we assess the kind of learning that we're targeting and the understandings that we're hoping for our kiddos? I'm asking a multi-part question here. One is, what were some of the assessments that we used? And how were we giving kiddos opportunities to identify the assessment that would best capture the theme that they had uncovered in their family's text? So what was the range of assessments, and then how are we giving kids guidance for identifying the most appropriate assessment for their thinking?
Yeah. So I gave my students a choice. I knew that I wanted them to be able to identify the theme, talk about theme and the theme that they're noticing. But I didn't want to say this is how it had to look. So I came up with a choice board, and they were able to do it as a crest, in which they were having a 5-paragraph in each of the little crests. But one of the things I said had to be on everybody's was they had to have a paragraph about what the theme was and how we know that that is the theme. And so really talking about a good, strong paragraph of identifying theme and then giving supporting details of why that's the theme. So one of them was a crest. One of them, they were able to kind of write a storybook, just basically a narrative. But they created a book. So a couple of my kids chose that. And they were just basically creating the story and telling the story. But the theme had to be woven in so tightly that no matter who picked it up, they would be able to kind of identify that theme. Another one was just a 5-paragraph essay. If you just want to go ahead and do a 5-paragraph essay, go ahead. And the fourth thing that we did was we created a Google Slide PowerPoint presentation. So they did it on Google Docs.
So we structured it. We really structured how to do the writing. So we used this text. So we used the opportunity of them doing their interview as their text and their research for their writing. And then they synthesized their text, which was their interview. And they ended up writing kind of like an essay. So we structured it. The first paragraph was going to be state your theme, introduce your family member. And then the middle part was just kind of tell your family member's story that they shared with you. And then the last paragraph, which we found, I think, the most inspiring, was the student wrote a reflection of the experience. And so if you look at the Google Slides I put together, there's a slide where there's 3 or 4 questions, reflection questions, and the kids wrote to that, like, this experience made me feel closer to my mom, or this experience was different because I had one girl say she didn't know she could talk to her grandma. Like, it just had never even occurred to her. And so with that writing assessment, we created a rubric that uses informational standards and some narrative standards, I believe, because it's kind of a in between. So we have an actual writing rubric. So if you decide to do the writing, there's a writing rubric, change it up however. But and then another thing we looked at is the responsive questioning. We had practice sessions in our classroom where they practice doing responsive questioning. So I use that as a speaking and listening grade.
Excellent.
And then they also did a video reflection where they kind of answered the same questions that they wrote about in their conclusion paragraph. And I use that to kind of look at more of the non-standard parts of the assessment, like how deep did they go, how connected did they get? Because part of the major understandings was to be connected, and you could tell from their video reflections if they were connected.
There's so, like you said, it was kind of a narrative piece. It was like there was a little bit of narrative, there was a little bit of information, but there's also that big part about theme. And so it was we kind of created that. There were so many pieces to this project, and there was so much learning going on that it lent itself to like so many grades, right? And then we also we practiced our questions. So I mean, there's so many levels within this one project.
Oh, yeah. We taught the toolkit asking questions lessons.
Yes.
So that was a big thing too with reading. So we got a lot of reading grades out of it.